Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to break down a really compelling strategic analysis that argues a single regional conflict is setting off something called the Great Reconfiguration of the entire global order. So let's dive right in. So, the analysis we're looking at kicks things off with a huge claim. I mean, a really bold claim. The post 1945 unipolar world, that whole era of singular American dominance, it's over. And we're not talking about some slow, gentle decline here. The sources describe it as a rapid termination event that's being triggered by what's happening right now. And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's the puzzle we're going to unpack today. How on earth can a regional power potentially bring a global hegemon, the dominant world power, to its knees? Well, according to this analysis, the answer is found in a series of fatal flaws, tactical, strategic, and economic, that have just been put on full display for the world to see. To really get this, we have to see the conflict as way more than just a war. The analysis gives it a name, the Great Reconfiguration. It's basically a collision between the old way of thinking about power and a brand new and pretty startling reality. Okay, so the first piece of this new reality is all about tactics. It starts with a concept called the inverse cost pyramid. Now, this describes a fundamental and maybe even fatal flaw in Western military thinking that's been decades in the making. This slide right here lays out the critical difference. On the left, you've got the Western model, which is like an upside-down pyramid. It's super top-heavy with billion-dollar jets and aircraft carriers, but the base, the foundation, is hollow. On the right, you see the opposite model, a proper pyramid, built on a massive foundation of cheap, disposable things like drones. Now, if you find yourself in a war of attrition, a long, grinding war, well, that's a decisive advantage. And this number, wow, this really tells the whole story. 100 to 1. That's the cost difference when you use a $2 million interceptor muscle to shoot down a $20,000 drone. The source material is blunt here. It calls this a mathematical defeat. There's just no way you can win a war when the economics are that skewed against you. It's simply not sustainable. And we're already seeing the consequences of this. The analysis points to how surgical strikes are taking apart the coalition's entire technological nervous system. As you can see in this table, they're not just hitting random things. They are systematically blinding the giant. They've damaged key long-range radars, and get this, for some of them, the production line is now closed. That means these are irrecoverable losses, creating permanent blind spots in the defense network. The rate of attrition here is just staggering. In a short window that analysts are now calling the 12-day war, coalition forces reportedly used up 25% of the entire global stock of THAAD interceptors. Think about that. A quarter of the whole world's supply. Just gone in less than 2 weeks. You can't keep that up. It's an unsustainable burn rate that no amount of money can fix quickly. So you can see how this tactical nightmare starts to spill over into the bigger picture, into grand strategy. The analysis uses game theory to argue why having the biggest, baddest weapons, what they call escalation dominance, is suddenly less important than having escalation control. Okay, so here's the crucial point. Dominance is just blunt force. It's a sledgehammer, the ability to cause overwhelming destruction. But control, that's a scalpel. It's the ability to apply just enough pressure in just the right spot to force your opponent into a trap they can't get out of. It's all about being flexible and precise, and it's proving to be the real game changer here. The sources use a pretty simple analogy for this, the bully versus the new kid. The US, as the hegemon, the bully, is actually trapped. Its power relies on its reputation, its credibility, so it has to react to every single provocation to maintain face and look strong. And that makes its next move totally predictable. The challenger, the new kid, wins by simply poking the bully, goading it into these predictable, incredibly expensive, and ultimately self-destructive overreactions. And here it is, the bully's predictable escalation ladder. It's a trap. When the first step, initial airstrikes, fails to get the job done, the next logical step is to hit civilian infrastructure. When that doesn't work either, the situation inevitably leads to mission creep, which is just a slow slide towards the final catastrophic step, a full-on ground invasion. This whole scenario has a really haunting parallel in history. Way back in 415 BCE, the Athenian Empire was at the absolute peak of its power. They launched this massive invasion of Sicily. And they lost. Not because they were outfought, but because they were overextended. Their enemy just had to cut their supply lines. As the old saying goes, the biggest problem is always resupply. So just like what happened to Athens, and much more recently in Vietnam, The failure of an initial air campaign logically leads straight into a quagmire. A ground invasion of Iran, these sources predict, would require a national draft in the U.S. and would become a 5 to 10-year trap, ultimately just speeding up the process of imperial decline. But believe it or not, the military quagmire is only half the picture. The analysis argues that the real true vulnerability here is economic, and it targets the 50-year-old system that the entire global economy is built on, the petrodollar. Here's the simple version of how it works. The Gulf states, the GCC, sell their oil, but only for US dollars. Then they take those trillions of dollars and recycle them right back into the US economy, buying up stocks, bonds, real estate, you name it. And right now, all that recycled wealth is what's fueling the US tech and AI bubble. This conflict, well, it puts a knife right to the throat of that entire system. Why? Because, as the analysis puts it, the Gulf states themselves are a mirage. Those glittering cities in the desert are totally dependent on systems that are shockingly fragile. I mean, look at this. Up to 90% of their fresh water comes from desalination plants, which are huge, stationary targets. If those get hit, you're looking at total state failure in about 2 weeks. And if they collapse, that recycling loop is severed, the AI bubble bursts, and it could trigger a global depression worse than the 1930s. So with this old order potentially dying, what comes next? The analysis lays out two very different, competing visions for the world that could rise from the ashes. On one side, you have a vision the sources call Pax Judaica, which is a new regional order with an ascendant Israel at its center. And on the other side, you have what they term the resilient heartland, an alliance between Iran, Russia, and China that would control the vast Eurasian landmass. According to this analysis, these are the two futures on the table. The analysis breaks down this Pax Judaica project into three main pillars. First, there's the Ben Gurion Canal, a proposed alternative to the Suez Canal that would give Israel control over a critical global trade choke point. Second, scaling up AI surveillance technology to govern the entire region. And third, a strategic partnership to bring in millions of laborers to actually build all of this new infrastructure. Now, the Heartland strategy is completely different. It's all about patience and waiting for the right opportunity. Russia waits for the U.S. to get bogged down in an Iranian quagmire, and then it makes a final move to secure Odessa. Meanwhile, China plays both sides, providing technical support to help bleed the U.S. dry, all while publicly calling for peace and stability. So after all that, where does this assessment leave us? Well, to wrap things up, the analysis answers three key geopolitical questions. And the predictions here are pretty stark. First question, will there be a U.S. ground invasion? The analysis says yes. It's almost a logical necessity to maintain credibility after an air war fails. Second, will nuclear weapons be used? The answer is no. The sources argue that a long conventional war is just far more profitable for the defense industry. And finally, will the Al-Aqsa Mosque be destroyed? The prediction here is yes, viewing it as a likely trigger to escalate the entire conflict into a global religious war. And that leaves us with this one final, defining question. The analysis we've just walked through argues that the unipolar moment is definitively over. So as this world order dies, what comes next? Is it a new hegemonic project centered in Jerusalem or a new axis of power rising in the East? According to these sources, that is the question that's going to define the rest of the 21st century.